Dog keeps hugging crying kitten. When the vet realizes why, he bursts into tears. "Hello, City Animal Rescue, how can I help?" A calm voice answered. Emily, her own voice trembling paint, splattered on her jeans from an earlier art project, now forgotten, huddled deeper into the grimy alcove. "Yes, please. I'm in the old mill district near the collapsed warehouse on Elm Street. There's a dog, a big shepherd. He's hugging a tiny kitten, and they're both crying, or at least it sounds like it. The dog looks terrible. There's blood, and it's starting to snow harder. I don't think they'll last much longer." The wind howled around her, threatening to snatch her words away as the dispatcher's urgent questions began. What terrors awaited the rescue team? What unimaginable truth about this devoted dog would soon bring a seasoned veterinarian to his knees in tears? Don't miss the full, heart-stopping story. Subscribe now, hit that like button, and listen to uncover the incredible reason behind Bruno's devotion. The sterile scent of antiseptic barely masked the metallic tang of blood in the examination room. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man whose hands had coaxed life back into countless fragile bodies, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a sensation usually reserved for the grimmest prognoses. He wasn't looking at the tiny whimpering ball of fluff on the heated pad. The kitten, though dangerously underweight and hypothermic, was relatively straightforward. His gaze was fixed on the grainy monochrome image of the X-ray clipped to the light board. The German shepherd, splayed unconscious on the steel table, was a landscape of prior injuries now overshadowed by something new, something insidious. They'd named him Bruno after the faded tag found on his frayed collar. Bruno's breathing was shallow, each labored rise and fall of his emaciated chest, a testament to a will that was clearly outstripping his physical reserves. Nurse Helen, ever efficient, was monitoring his vitals, her brow furrowed with concern. She'd seen bad cases, they all had, but the sheer quiet stoicism of this dog, even in unconsciousness, was unnerving. Alistair ran a gloved hand over his tired eyes, then peered closer at the X-ray again. It wasn't the fractured rib healed, but poorly set. It wasn't the collection of old pellet gunshot embedded beneath the skin testament to a cruel past. It was something near the abdomen, a shadow and anomaly that hadn't made sense with the initial physical exam, which had focused on the gaping infected wound on his flank, a wound Bruno had apparently sustained while shielding the kitten during their rescue. "Pressure," Helen murmured, her voice low, steady but too low, heart rates erratic. Alistair nodded, his mind racing. He'd initially assumed the flank wound was the primary life threat, a nasty, suppurating gash that spoke of a brutal fight or an accident. But this image, this suggested something deeper, something that explained the peculiar, almost obsessive way the dog had curled around the kitten even as his own life force ebbed. He'd seen the rescuer's footage, the dog barely able to stand, forming a living shield, his body a barricade against the biting wind and driving rain, the tiny kitten nestled into his fur crying. He'd gently, repeatedly nudged the kitten closer, as if trying to merge their forms. "Helen," Alistair said, his voice hoarse, "prep for an ultrasound and get me a finer gauge needle for a biopsy just in case. There's something here." He gestured vaguely at the X-ray, a profound unease settling over him. He'd seen devotion, he'd seen animal loyalty that put humans to shame, but the dawning suspicion of what this X-ray truly implied, what this dog had endured not just for the kitten, but because of its own desperate, damaged physiology. He looked from the X-ray to the unconscious dog, then to the small, now quieting kitten in the incubator. A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path down Alistair Finch's cheek. Helen looked up startled. The seasoned vet, the man who faced death daily with stoic resolve, was visibly shaken, his composure fractured. He choked back a sob, turning away abruptly, one hand covering his mouth. "Oh, God," he whispered, the sound swallowed by the hum of the machines. That poor, poor, brave soul. The reason for Bruno's unwavering, painful embrace was beginning to crystallize, and it was far more tragic than simple protection. The week leading up to that moment in Dr. Finch's clinic had been a blur of escalating dread for Sarah Jenkins. A freelance graphic designer with a penchant for urban exploration photography, Sarah's usual haunts were abandoned factories and forgotten railway lines, not the squalid back alleys of the city's neglected East End, but a persistent rumor of a ghost mural by a reclusive street artist had drawn her into the labyrinthine network of overflowing bins and decaying brickwork. It was a Tuesday, the sky the color of a day-old bruise, spitting a miserable cold drizzle. Sarah, camera bag slung across her body, navigated a particularly grim passage, choked with sodden cardboard and the cloying stench of refuse. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint, so heartbreakingly fragile, it barely registered above the drip of water and the distant city hum, a kitten's cry. Not a robust yowl of indignation, but a thin, reedy mewling that spoke of utter desolation. Drawn by the sound, she picked her way carefully over the debris. Tucked into a dilapidated doorway half concealed by a ripped black trash bag was a sight that stopped her cold. A German shepherd, large but shockingly thin, lay curled against the damp concrete. Its fur, a matted tapestry of mud and grime, was plastered to its skeletal frame. Scars, old and new, crisscrossed its muzzle and flanks. One leg was held at an awkward angle, and a dark, ugly stain was spreading on the pavement beneath its side. But it wasn't the dog's own wretched condition that seized Sarah's attention. It was what he was cradling. Pressed tight against his chest, sheltered from the worst of the wind and rain, was a tiny sodden kitten. It was no bigger than her hand, its gray fur spiked and dark with damp. Its eyes were sealed shut, and its miniature body trembled violently, the pathetic cries tearing at something deep within Sarah. The dog Bruno, as she would later learn his name, was from the tag barely visible beneath the filth, was visibly in agony. Each breath was a shallow, pained affair. Yet, with infinite gentleness, he would occasionally lower his great head and nuzzle the kitten, a low rumble, almost a purr, vibrating in his chest, a sound of comfort despite his own torment. His eyes, when they briefly met Sarah's, were wells of despair and of fierce primal protectiveness. Sarah's first instinct was to rush forward, but a low guttural growl from the dog, weak yet undeniably warning, froze her. He wasn't threatening her. He was protecting his charge. His body tensed a shield around the kitten. Her heart ached. She could see the raw, infected wound on his side now oozing and angry. He was dying, she realized with a sickening lurch, and he was spending his last reserves of strength trying to save this tiny creature. "Oh, you poor things," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She fumbled in her bag, her fingers clumsy with cold and urgency, pulling out her phone. Her usual subjects were static, inanimate. This was life and death, immediate and raw. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number for City Animal Rescue, a number she'd thankfully saved after a previous encounter with a stray cat. "Hello. Yes, I need help. There's a dog, a German Shepherd. He's badly injured, and he has a kitten. An alley off Docker Street, East End. Yes, he's trying to protect it." Her voice cracked. "Please hurry. I don't think they have much time." This was the inciting incident, the moment her quiet life of observing decay was irrevocably interrupted by the desperate pulse of survival. She couldn't just take a picture and walk away. She had to see this through. She ended the call and crouched down, keeping a respectful distance, murmuring soft words of reassurance. She wasn't sure either animal could truly comprehend, but which she needed to voice nonetheless. The rain intensified, plastering her hair to her face, but she didn't move, her gaze fixed on the tragic, tender tableau before her. The wait for the rescue team felt like an eternity, each minute stretched taut with anxiety. Sarah remained crouched, the damp seeping into her jeans, her initial shock giving way to a gnawing helplessness. Bruno's breathing grew shallower, his protective nuzzles less frequent, though his body remained a steadfast shield for the kitten. The kitten's cries, too, were becoming weaker, more sporadic. Sarah fought back tears, a lump forming in her throat. She had half a protein bar in her bag, but she doubted Bruno would eat, and she certainly couldn't risk getting closer without stressing him further. Finally, the distant wail of a siren growing steadily louder heralded the arrival of City Animal Rescue. The van, emblazoned with its hopeful logo, navigated the narrow alleyway with practiced skill, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Mark Davies, the lead rescue officer, a man whose weathered face showed both kindness and the toll of countless grim discoveries, stepped out, followed by his younger colleague, Lena. "Over here," Sarah called, her voice hoarse. Mark took in the scene with a practiced eye. The emaciated dog, the tiny kitten, Sarah's distressed face. "All right, miss, thanks for calling us. Let's see what we got." His voice was calm, professional, but Sarah detected the underlying urgency. Approaching Bruno was a delicate operation. Despite his weakness, a deep rumble started in his chest as Mark got closer. "Easy, boy, easy now." Mark soothed, his movements slow and non-threatening. "We're here to help you and your little friend." He had a thick, soft blanket in one hand and a leash in the other. Lena stood by with a pet carrier, its interior lined with a warming pad. The dog's eyes, dull with pain, still held a spark of defiance. He tried to shift his body further over the kitten, a heartbreakingly futile gesture of protection. "He's got a bad wound on his side," Sarah informed them, pointing, "and he's barely moving." Mark nodded. "Okay, Lena, let's try for the kitten first. It might make him a bit easier to handle if he knows the little one is safe." Lena approached cautiously, speaking in soft, reassuring tones. Bruno tensed, a low growl escaping his lips, but he was too weak to do more. With infinite care, Lena managed to scoop up the tiny, shivering kitten. It let out a pitiful squeak. Instantly, Bruno tried to lift his head, a look of anguish in his eyes. "It's okay, boy," Mark said gently, placing a hand on Bruno's head. "She's safe. We'll take care of her." He then expertly slipped a muzzle over Bruno's snout, a precaution despite the dog's enfeebled state. And with Sarah's help, they maneuvered the heavy blanket under him. Lifting him was a grim task. He was little more than skin and bone, yet his frame was large. The smell of infection from his wound was overpowering. The journey to Dr. Finch's veterinary clinic, the one City Animal Rescue used for its most critical cases, was tense. Lena cradled the kitten now named Pip by Sarah on a whim, whispering to it while Mark drove his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Sarah followed in her own car, her heart pounding. At the clinic, a flurry of activity greeted them. Dr. Finch, alerted by Mark's call, was ready. Pip was whisked away, first placed in an incubator, and immediately started on fluids and antibiotics. The prognosis was guarded: severe malnutrition, hypothermia, and a nasty eye infection. Then came Bruno. Getting him onto the examination table was a struggle. He was limp, barely conscious, but as they passed the incubator holding Pip, he made a visible effort to lift his head, a soft whine escaping him. "He's still looking for the kitten." Helen, the veterinary nurse, observed, her voice soft with pity. The initial examination of Bruno was sobering: dehydration, starvation, multiple old injuries, and the festering wound on his flank, which Dr. Finch confirmed was badly infected and would require immediate surgical debridement. He was put on an IV drip for fluids, antibiotics, and pain relief. Blood tests were run revealing anemia and dangerously low protein levels. Over the next few days, a grim routine established itself. Sarah visited daily, bringing small offerings. A special recovery formula dog food doctor, Finch had recommended a soft blanket. Pip, against the odds, began to show faint signs of improvement. She was taking small amounts of milk replacer from a syringe, and her temperature was stabilizing. Bruno, however, was a different story. Despite the surgery to clean and stitch his flank wound and the aggressive antibiotic therapy, he remained listless, his recovery agonizingly slow. He ate little, mostly when Sarah was there to coax him, her presence seeming to offer some small comfort. The only time he showed any spark was when Helen would bring Pip, still in her incubator, close to his cage for a few minutes. He would watch the kitten intently, his tail giving a faint, almost imperceptible thump. Dr. Finch was puzzled. "His blood work is improving, albeit slowly," he told Sarah during one of her visits, his brow furrowed. "The infection in the flank wound is starting to respond to treatment, but he's just not bouncing back the way I'd expect. There's an apathy there, a deep weariness that worries me. It's more than just physical depletion." Complications arose. Bruno developed a persistent low-grade fever. His appetite waned further. He seemed to be fading before their eyes. Sarah felt a growing despair. She'd started a small online fundraiser, sharing the story of Bruno and Pip, and a trickle of donations was coming in, enough to cover some of the mounting vet bills. But money couldn't buy a will to live if it wasn't there. The team at the clinic was doing everything they could. More tests were run, ultrasounds of his abdomen, chest, x-rays. The old healed fractures and embedded pellets were noted, but nothing acute that would explain his profound lethargy or the persistent fever. Dr. Finch began to suspect something else was going on, something hidden that they were missing. Bruno's insistence on hugging Pip the way he had curled his body so tightly around the kitten, even in his weakened state, kept replaying in the vet's mind. It was more than just protection. It felt almost desperate, as if Bruno himself were seeking something from the contact. One afternoon, Helen called Sarah. "Dr. Finch wants to do a more detailed X-ray series on Bruno, focusing on his abdomen and spine. He's also considering exploratory surgery if we don't find anything. Bruno took a bad turn this morning. His temperature spiked and his breathing is more labored." Sarah rushed to the clinic, her heart heavy with foreboding. She found Bruno lying on his side in the oxygen cage, His eyes closed, his magnificent form a shadow of what it should have been. It was then, as Dr. Finch reviewed the new set of X-rays, his face growing increasingly grave, that the events of the shock hook began to unfold, leading to his stunned realization and tears. The images revealed something that initial checks had overlooked, masked by the more obvious trauma, something that spoke of a chronic, painful condition Bruno had been living with long before he'd found Pip. The hushed efficiency of the clinic seemed to amplify the frantic beat of Sarah's own heart. Dr. Finch stood before the illuminated X-ray panel, his shoulders slumped, a stark contrast to his usual brisk, decisive demeanor. Helen hovered nearby, her expression anxious. Sarah held her breath, fearing the worst. "What is it, doctor?" Sarah finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Finch took a deep, unsteady breath before turning to face her. His eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were clouded with a profound sadness. "Sarah," he began, his voice heavy, "Bruno's flank wound the infection.